Good morning. I'm Ben Ayers, Dean of the Terry College of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Terry Third Thursday and to our Terry Executive Education Center. This is the home of our professional MBA program, our executive MBA program, as well as our executive education programs that we offer out of this facility in Atlanta and throughout the Southeast. This is a great event for us monthly, and it's a great opportunity for our alumni, students, and other business leaders to get together, and we thank you for joining us today. This is organized by our alumni board, and so I want to thank Nancy Watley and the board for organizing today and their work in organizing the entire series this year. They do a great job. I also would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, our corporate sponsor, the Bank of North Georgia, as well as our two media sponsors, Atlanta Journal-Constitution and WABE, Atlanta Public Broadcasting. So please join me in thanking them. So a little heads up regarding some upcoming events. On December 14th, it'll be my pleasure to kick off the 34th Annual Georgia Economic Outlook. I haven't been doing it for 34 years, but we've been doing it for 34 years, and we're going to kick this off in Atlanta at the Marriott Marquis on the 14th. And then during the months of January and February, I will tour the state providing statewide forecasts, national forecasts, and then more localized information as well. Interesting time for the economy, and so I hope that many of you will join us on December the 14th. We expect a great turnout. With respect to our upcoming Terry Third Thursday, as is our tradition, we will not meet next month, so everybody has the month off from Terry Third Thursday next month. We'll reconvene on January 19th. Derek Kiyongo, who's the CEO for the Center for Civil and Human Rights, will join us. On February 16th, Lee Thomas, the Deputy Commissioner of Film, Music, and Digital Entertainment Office for the Georgia Department of Economic Development, will be here. And then in March, Dennis Lockhart. Dennis is the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. So we've got a fantastic lineup in January, February, March. I hope that many of you will join us for that. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Ron Rogowski. Ron is the chairman of the Atlanta Sports Council and also vice president of global brand for UPS. As vice president at UPS, Ron oversees the development of global strategies that create new ways for businesses and consumers to access UPS's services. He joined UPS in 1985 and has worked on the company's market strategy for aligning the multiple sales organizations resulting from UPS's acquisitions that they've made since becoming a part of the New York Stock Exchange in 1999. More recently, he has been charged with the development and execution of UPS's global brand strategy as well as their sponsorship strategy. Ron is a native of Detroit. He earned his undergraduate degree from Wayne State and his MBA from the University of Detroit. Today, though, Ron will focus more on his role as chairman of the Atlanta Sports Council, which is a division of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And specifically, he's going to talk about what it takes to attract and support large sporting events, which the city of Atlanta has been extremely successful in doing. So please join me in welcoming Ron Rogowski.
Thank you. So a couple of things maybe just before we start off. My son just recently graduated from UGA, and so last night I was having a conversation with him, and I was instructed to properly kick off this meeting with a Go Dogs. So let's consider that. And I think this is videotaped, so I can tell him that I actually did it. He didn't believe I would do it. And then the second thing, just before we jump in, I thought at least before we get into this part of the discussion, I'd share a little bit about a company that I'm incredibly proud to work for, and that's UPS, and been there almost, over 31 years, almost 32 now. And perhaps maybe a few of you being in the business community know this, but maybe I'll shed a little bit of color on it. UPS is a company, and it's about the color brown. It started in 1907 in Seattle, Washington as a messenger service. It was an American messenger company. It was bicycles, a telephone, telegraph, and delivering messages on bicycles. Then the new technology came along, and it was motorcycles. And then our founders had this opportunity where they looked around Seattle and saw all these department stores. Was there an opportunity to take some of these packages that people were purchasing at these department stores and deliver them to their home, which is an interesting concept that started in 1907, but yet here today with e-commerce explosion, how much of that business we do delivering packages that are purchased to the home. So right around 1913, we bought our first truck, and it was red. It was painted red. And so a few years later, around 1916, we're growing, and we decide we're going to add a second and a third truck. So the second truck comes along, and we paint it yellow. So now the third truck gets delivered, and there's this conversation about, well, maybe we should paint it a different color because we'll look bigger if we have different vehicles and different colors driving around. And so the decision was made, maybe continuity was the way to go, and we're going to have all three trucks painted yellow. So it stayed that way for about 3 more years. And then roughly around 1919, there was this discussion about we're growing, and our department stores are our primary customer, and we have these kind of audacious yellow vehicles, and they conflict, and we really want our customers to be at the forefront, the department stores. So perhaps we ought to look at more subdued business, color. And at that time, in 1919, the benchmark, or one of the benchmarks for first class and elegance, was in train transportation, and it was the Pullman car. And so one of our founders started to take a look at that and say, you know what, I like that color on a lot of levels. It has a certain amount of first classiness and elegance associated with the Pullman car. And then more importantly, the color brown doesn't show dirt as much as other colors. And so there was a lot of emphasis on keeping the vehicles clean and protecting the brand even at that early stage. So in 1919, we converted the vehicles to brown, and that's really where the iconic brown came from and originated. And then in 1925, we converted our drivers over to brown uniforms. And then interesting enough, in 1998, we actually filed 2 trademarks on the color brown for the uniforms and for our package vehicles in the transportation category to be able to protect ourselves against anyone else who would try to use that color. And in fact, the brown that you see today, sometimes people will refer to it as Pullman brown, but it's really not. It's close, but it is our own mix of colors that we've trademarked. So that's just a little story on how we ended up with brown and how we started out, and originally with red trucks, yellow trucks, and then ultimately brown. So with that, I want to get into the Atlanta Sports Council discussion. So my hope today is to give you kind of a peek under the covers of what we actually do to bring this together. I have the honor of serving currently as the chair, a 2-year term, just finishing up the first year. And then joining us today, by the way, I was glad he could make it, was Dan Corso, who is the president of the Chamber of Commerce. So Dan, appreciate you coming by today. So who are we? The Sports Council, in my 10 years when I first started out as a board member, was a collection of 25. I remember I went to my meeting and we sat in a smaller room and there were 25 what I would call an intersection of private and public sector leaders that were there to advance sports in the city of Atlanta. And today, there are 55 people in that room. In fact, Dan and I joke about the fact that we can't even fit everybody in the room, but it's grown that much in the last 10 years. And it's various people that sit from, like I said, all the way from the educational and the athletic directors to some of the law firms, to some of the businesses, to some of the property owners, to some of the venue owners. And that's an important collective group because as I go through this, you'll see that all these people need to come together at some point to be able to make these things happen. And so you have a really engaged group. But the Atlanta Sports Council itself started in 1985, and it was really the seed of the beginning for the 1996 Olympics. So at that time, they were called Sports 2000. So you can imagine a visionary look, Sports 2000. So as they started this and we ended up winning the Olympics in the 96 Olympics, it started to evolve. And what we'll talk a little bit about today is what does it take for all these different groups to come together, and I'll give you some examples. And of course, some of the big ones I'll talk a little bit about, but I want to talk about some of the smaller efforts that are just as important that help set us up for some of these bigger opportunities. So why do we do it? The Sports Council is a portion or a subset of the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. They look, of course, to drive economic impact. They want to increase the visibility of the region. And I think that's an important one because while economics is certainly important and all these are, one of the benefits of it is showcasing the city of Atlanta. And what that creates an opportunity not only for more increased investment, but also to attract talent. As we continue to grow as a city and more industries and business come to Atlanta or relocate to Atlanta, We need a talent. We want to make sure that people stay and see Atlanta as a viable option to be able to create their careers and call Atlanta home. So it's this visibility, not only on a business level, but on a talent level. And then I think it's also about enhancing. Whether you're a sports fan or not, what you'll find is that these events create other opportunities, and I'll touch on a few of them, that transcend just the sports format, although this is a big part of it. So, why Metro Atlanta? Now, this is where you're going to get into the recipe, and it's very simple. But and again, you can articulate this, and it sounds so simple, but it's very hard to watch how it all comes together. But it comes together so well in Atlanta under the leadership of Dan, and he's going to hear that a few times a day, because I want you to know how hard he works to make sure all this stuff comes together, with coordinating all the team and all the members of the board of directors of the Sports Council. The world's busiest airport. 80% of the U.S. population is within 2 hours of direct flight of Atlanta. So when you're sitting down and you're making a pitch, you have this world-class international airport that creates a very convenient way for people to get in and out of Atlanta. Not to mention the recent announcement in the, a 10-year investment in the airport, which is going to continue to be important to what Atlanta offers up on that side. Places to play, okay? This is one that continues to evolve. So just look at the downtown area. College Football Hall of Fame, Civil Rights Museum, Aquarium, Coca-Cola Museum, the Ferris wheel. And I can tell you from stuff we're sitting in, there's a bigger vision for much more down there. And then Centennial Park, and I'm probably leaving off a few. But when people come down to an event, I think another part that creates Atlanta being unique to other cities, and every city's going to tell you that they have a certain culture, a certain experience to provide the attendee. I think one of the benefits of Atlanta, and I'll talk about many of them, is having that tight downtown area. So if you've ever had the chance to attend an event, sometimes in cities it can be quite dispersed, and that creates more transportation, more time getting across town to experience. One of the benefits of Atlanta is the fact that you can do a lot in that downtown area, and people like that because once they get down there, they can walk around and experience a lot of different things, and that is an advantage. I think the other thing is places to stay. Within walking distance of that downtown area, there are over 10,000 rooms. So accommodating at least 10,000 people that could book a room and be able to walk to all the events. And then we're going to talk about how we get a little further out from just downtown Atlanta and some of the impact and what the whole metro area can offer up. You have a corporate community. I talked a little bit about that. We have 18 of the top Fortune 500 companies headquartered in Atlanta. Now, not just that 18, I mean, all you are familiar with, we have North American headquarters here, we have regional headquarters here, we have a great tech, fintech, med tech, educational system here, secondary, that create this environment where everyone wants to be able to contribute to Atlanta being successful in these events. And that's what this really comes down to. Having a city, having a mayor and a government that supports this process, and having a business community. And yet, while that sounds, yes, you would have to have all that, the way, in my experience in the last 10 years, that this sports council works under Dan's leadership as the president, comes together, it really works well. Everybody is in this to win. And so when you come together as a group and Dan makes a phone call and says, we're looking at this, well, what do you think of this? Let's consult about this. And we quickly rally everyone around and identify, and you'll find between the properties, the business community, and the city, everyone comes together and starts putting a plan together on how do we become successful at winning these. I think you've got passionate volunteers, and I'll touch a little bit on this a little later. I mean, I think Atlanta offers the traditional Southern hospitality, and people want to volunteer. All these events require some magnitude of volunteers in order to make them happen. So these big events swoop in, they're big productions, there's certainly people affiliated with the properties, but think about all the ancillary activity that has to happen, whether it's an Olympics or whether we're going to talk about a little bit about Super Bowl. You have to have a volunteer base that wants to participate in that. And we've had very good success with volunteers here in Atlanta, and people wanted to be part of that. We're a top 10 media market, and we have a long history of events. I touched on 1996 and the Olympics, but we've also hosted 2 Super Bowls and 4 Final Fours, along with a lot of other things that I think add. And what I hope to bring together today is all the different elements that are taking place, that sometimes on a day-to-day basis you may see a an article in the newspaper, you may hear a news story. But when you look at the collective group of all these different activities, you start to get the magnitude of what's happening here. But when you take a look at things like the BBT Tennis Classic, the East Lake PGA Championship, this SEC football conference title coming up. I'm going to forget a few, but there's all these other ancillary different events. In some places, the Sports Council plays a supportive role. In some places, we actually go out and try to recruit more of these events. And then, in fact, December 17th, we were in our quarterly meeting yesterday. We have the first bowl of the season in Atlanta, the U.S. Air Force Reserve Celebration Bowl. December 17th, historical black colleges. It's the first kickoff bowl game of the year, and it'll be here in Atlanta. And we've worked really hard to keep that in Atlanta, working with ESPN and John Grant and his team. So we've got a lot of things to be proud of here that happen just beyond some of these bigger events. So here, let's get into some of the process. So like any typical, you have to go out and you have to find out what's on the agenda, right? So what's going to be out there for bid, whether it's with the NFL, the NBA, run the gambit. Oh, by the way, I did leave off of there. We've hosted NBA All-Star Games, MLB All-Star Games, NHL All-Star Games, and all of those will be in consideration. Maybe not the NHL, but certainly on the NBA. But I want to talk a little bit about competition venues, because once you receive a proposal, or you, as a city, we determine we want to go and put together a proposal to solicit the event coming, there's this orchestration of events that has to take place, and the proposal has to be put together. But more importantly, what a lot of time is spent is, will venues be available? And because you have a lot of venues, and we're going to have some more, and I'll talk a little bit about them, but it's important to know that there aren't concerts already booked, professional teams aren't already playing, and beyond the competition venue, a lot of these particular properties want to make sure they have proper hotel space, proper space for the media, and then also what I would call the hospitality. You know, things like the Fox Theater, the Tabernacle. So when they look at this, often the requirement is for the bigger events, we're going to come in and for 2 weeks straight, we've got to know not only that we have the venue, but all these ancillary venues are dedicated so that we can run the full production. So then Dan, by the way, runs with a very small team. It's him and three people, and they do an incredible job when you see the amount of work that goes on, reaching out to the community, reaching out to people like me to how do we put this all together. And what you'll find is that they have to be able to put all that into the request or the proposal, and they have to make sure that they address all these questions. And these proposals are massive. And it's not just the document itself, it's the constant conference calls. So what you have to do as any good salesperson trying to convince somebody that this is the place to come is you have to talk about the city being committed, that we have the infrastructure, that we have a resume that says we can do this. And oh, by the way, we're on the phone with you every day nagging you going, what don't you have? What are you thinking? Where do you stand? What do you think we're short on? So there's this constant working behind the scenes trying to understand if there's something there that's not, can we address it? Can we adjust it? And so there's a lot of that activity. And then of course, that's just the beginning. Once you're awarded, you have to go and put all this stuff together. And this is, I would suggest, is a short list. So when you talk about the venues, you really have to take a look at beyond just the arenas. The other comment I'll make on is yesterday we had a meeting and received an update on some of the venues. So we have Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which is amazing. That's going up. We talked a little bit yesterday. It was approved last week that the city approved the renovations on the Phillips Arena. And we got to see some of the renderings on that and the changes they're going to make, again, with the fan in mind. It's amazing, the changes, and I think the whole experience that you're going to get out of Phillips Arena. And then, of course, we spent a little bit of time talking about the recent announcement as well as Georgia State picking up the old Turner Field, which we want to be called Georgia State Football Stadium now. But it's amazing what they're going to be doing to that stadium in phase one to start retrofitting it to accommodate football, and then right next to it, the baseball stadium. But it will be a mixed use. And so it's exciting to see, because this is where you start to bring different pieces and all this activity that's going on in the city that really start to give us more avenues to attract events, and then more reasons for people to want to come here and experience Atlanta. And so we'll talk a little more. This one I think is really important. The things that people won't discuss, but public safety and security. Unfortunately, in this day and age of everything that goes on, these are constant things that you have to make sure you have support from the city and you have adequate. And then what'll often happen is the sports council and Dan will be attending some of these bigger events, not only to continue the meetings with the property owners, in the case maybe the NCAA or the NFL, to talk about our event, but more importantly to find out what the most current status is that could impact some of this stuff. What's the expectation? He goes down, we review what went right at that event in that city, what went wrong, are we prepared for that? So there's a constant reevaluation. What you can't do is always pull from the same playbook. I mean, there's certain things like the airport, the lodging, the concentrated area of the downtown Atlanta, but you have to constantly look for what's new and what makes us more innovative. And so we're constantly out there talking to the other properties, and we're talking to the other cities trying to figure out what went right and what went wrong. But never underestimate the importance of this one, where you probably wouldn't notice a whole lot of it, but a lot of effort has to go into that. The other one is transportation, right? Getting all these people around, either the attendees down to these events, or the press to the right events, or the athletes to the right events. There's a whole logistical network that goes behind transportation. And again, I think what happens is, because of Dan's small team, they're actively engaged with the sports council, with these properties. And again, not all 55 of us are always involved with everything, but Dan reaches out to us depending on what the element is and where we can help and what expertise. And we're always ready to do that. But when you start to take a look at some of this stuff, they are a small team and they need support on all of this stuff. But what happens though is the property starts to become comfortable. They start to become comfortable because they know Dan, they know people on the sports council, they know people that are on Dan's team, and that creates a continuity. It's not like we go in, we bid, we win, and we throw it over. Dan is very conscious of making sure that there's connectivity, that these people feel comfortable, that the people that were in there pitching all the benefits of the city are the same people that they're going to be working with on the execution event. And again, these are little things, but I can't stress the importance of how well this works, because other cities, to be perfectly honest, are reaching out and trying to replicate what we're doing in Atlanta. So you have these great commitment from the city, you have great commitment from the community, the property owners I talked about, great commitment, two great owners, ownership group with the Hawks, and then of course Arthur with the Falcons that are really committed to the city. And then you have all this stuff and you mix it all together and you say, okay, how do we win over other cities? And I think it's this combination of everybody coming together to execute those. So those are some of the things that we would talk about. All these are important, and all of them have to be addressed when you put a proposal together. And then once you put the proposal together, as I said, you have to actually execute on them. So let me talk a little bit and take you down a journey on some of these. And talk about, certainly I'll talk, not all of these, I won't cover all of them, and then I'll give a little snapshot into some of the newer things that we're considering. But I want to spend a little bit of time on this U.S. Diving Olympic team send-off and give you an example of how we actually look at it. You might consider this a smaller event, but I'll give you kind of the timeline and how we look at this. So originally this was a proposal to go after and get the Olympic team to come to the 20-year anniversary of the '96 Olympics and have them do the trials here in Atlanta, right? So come to Atlanta, it's the 20-year anniversary, do your Olympic diving trials, and we'll, be able to host this event. And the thought behind that is there's NCAA diving championships. So how do we start to set the seed that we want to do more around diving? Now, this won't be as big as a Super Bowl or a Final Four, but they're incredibly important, and I want to show some of that. So what happened was, unfortunately, we didn't win. We didn't get that opportunity to host the trials. The trials were held up in Indianapolis. But Dan and the team got together, and we said, how can we create an opportunity out of this? And so then there was discussions with the Olympic Diving Committee to come to Atlanta for their send-off and their practice. And we have the Georgia Tech Aquatic Center, which is the historical diving venue for the '96 Olympics. And they were very open to that. So a week after the trials were done, they came down here and used the Georgia Aquatic Center to practice before they went down to Rio. And so when you do that, you're starting to set up a longer term relationship. And our hope was, okay, we didn't win the trials, but that doesn't mean we're going to go away. It doesn't mean that we don't have this great aquatic center that we want to use. And it doesn't mean that we aren't going to look at other things around the NCAA, but how can we start to build the reputation, expose them to the city of Atlanta, and see all the great things we offered. And so this was the kind of the consolation prize, but yet gave us an opportunity to do that. And so when you look at it, I think a couple of snapshots here. This is the picture of the aquatic center. It holds about 2,500 people. We estimated that it was about 2,000 people a day came up in the practice sessions to sit in the stands and watch the diving team just practice before they left for the Olympics. And the comment from the diving committee for the Olympic team was, these crowds are bigger than what we saw at the trials. So for us, that's a validation. We're saying this community supports this. We've got a great venue. And, you know, and I don't know how many of you knew about this, but this is one of those things where we're starting to see more opportunities down the line around diving. And yet, how we can take something that didn't quite work out the way we wanted, but turn it into an opportunity that will lead to more down the line. It's another shot. And again, they just came out to watch the diving team practice. The next one is another one, again, Major League Soccer. So I can remember about 8-9 years ago, and one of the things when Dan, and, you know, it's like anytime you have a change in leadership, and the Sports Council and Dan had come aboard, Dan was, of course, looking for ways to broaden. What could we do differently? You know, we've got some really good things to build on, but my job is to take this to another level. What can we do? And one of the concepts that he came to was, how do we use the greater metro Atlanta area to help us? If we expanded the footprint and looked at different types of sporting opportunities, would we be able to track more that would lead to other bigger opportunities? So we started to expand. Of course, the crown jewel is our downtown area and all the different venues down there, but it was actually an interesting strategy, and I'll show you an example of how it's played out. So we also started to have a discussion about the growing sport of lacrosse. It's growing in the high school, very big up in the Northeast, some on the West Coast. And so we sat down and we said, this sport is really taken off, and you can even see it at the high school level here in Atlanta. Could we start to host some exhibition games between some of the top colleges? And we were able to do that. And then we started to go after, could we go after Major League Soccer? And I think this is the third year, Dan, for the Major League Soccer Championship, or is that, yeah. And so it'll be hosted, but what I want to show is, it's the Kennesaw State Field. And this is where you have, not everything is a Georgia Dome, not everything can be done in some of these large arenas, but here we see a sport that's growing. And if you're involved, or you have kids that are involved in this sport, you understand how big this is. And if you've ever had the chance to go up to a lacrosse NCAA championship up in the Northeast, it's usually in Philadelphia or Baltimore, it is amazing the passion behind this. And I'm going to show you some other examples. But this is the championship, and it will be hosted, and we're going to use Kennesaw Field, which, by the way, a few years ago, 4 years ago, hosted the NCAA Women's Soccer Championship. So here's a venue that starts to work in other levels that perhaps maybe the dome is too big or could overwhelm. So it creates this opportunity, and we think this is a growing sport, and we think this sets up more opportunity to create more championships, and I would hope on our list the NCAA Lacrosse Championship eventually will consider Atlanta because of the exposure and the following we have for lacrosse. So here we go as far as what are we recruiting, right? So we talked about the diving, we talked about Major League Soccer, we've got college football national championship in 2018, the regional, the Super Bowl, and the Final Four. I do want to make a comment. I talked about volunteers, and so we were having a discussion. There is some opportunity if people are interested in. If you go to atlantasportscouncil.com, they keep a master list of people you can submit if you're interested in being a volunteer for events, and they're always looking to add to that list. And there's a new website for the college football championship game, atlchampgame.com, and they're looking for, they need 2,500 volunteers for that. So that creates an opportunity because when you know, at UPS, I get a lot of people that come by and say, how can I volunteer? How can we be part of this? And I think that's kind of the nice part of what Atlanta has to offer. And then we have the regionals and then the Super Bowl. We'll spend some time talking about the Super Bowl. So when you go after a Super Bowl, it's a large event. We talked about the logistics of making sure you've got a great owner in Arthur creating this new stadium and a huge investment. And by the way, the investments transcend not only just the stadium, but his commitment and his foundation to the West Side neighborhoods and jobs program. So again, that economic impact and how do we influence the city of Atlanta transcends just the fact that the event's coming and going to generate revenue. It has longer term impact. But it costs roughly $46 million to put on the event. And so one of the things, and I'll give you, this is how we actually, I think, gets an inside story and illustrates my comments about how the Sports Council work. So Minneapolis had one, and we're getting ready to bid. So the first thing we do as a Sports Council, and Dan, is they fly up to Minneapolis and they said, What did you do right? How did you win it? What did you do? And typically what will happen is a proposal's put together, and then you're awarded, and then cities go back, and then they try to figure out how to cover the $46 million. Well, Minneapolis said, we kind of turned that a little bit. We went and seen how much of that commitment between private and public sector we could get up front. And we thought perhaps maybe that created an advantage for us to go in and say, we don't have to worry about us coming up with the money after you award it to us. We're actually coming in here fully funded. So Dan says that's what we're going to do. So they come back and they work on the proposal. They reach out to the community. They reach out to the city, and they start talking about how do we bring this together. Of course, when they go in and make the pitch, you've got a brand new stadium going in. But let me give you a number. Out of the first 50 Super Bowls, 36 of them were at the cities we were up against, or 72%. So as we went down there, and by the way, the pitch is a 15-minute pitch. So you do all this work. So it tells you the amount of work you're doing. It's a 15-minute pitch. You have to be able to say, look, this is what we offer. You have to get it out of the door. You've got to put it all out there. But you've got to create this interest in why we would want to come there. The city of, certainly the stadium contributes a lot to that, and the experience that they've had with us, but also being fully funded and the commitment of the community. So you start to look at how does the city play, how are they committed to this process, and how does the community come together? I know that's repetitive, but the point is I'm trying to say is it works really well here in Atlanta with a great opportunity. So you bring this all together, but you have LA on the list, you have Miami on the list, you have Tampa on the list, and you have New Orleans. So that's who we're up against. So those 4 cities have hosted 72% of the Super Bowls. So that's what we're up against. And so, of course, we make the pitch, and part of the pitch is not only all the great things that I talked about, and we can do this, and we have a history, and we know Dan and his team, and we've got a great owner, and the owner was backing it, and Arthur wants to have the Super Bowl. And by the way, when you talk to any of the teams, whether it's the Hawks or any of them, when they have any discussions about all of this, one of the things that's always at the top of their list is we want championship teams in Atlanta. Of course, the Falcons would love to be playing in that Super Bowl. The Braves want to be playing in the World Series. And the Hawks really want to be playing in an NBA championship. That's the core of why they exist. But as we look at this, they went in and we were able to beat out those four cities and win it. And I think it may be the next slides. So what I'm going to do is this is part of the pitch video. So remember, you have 15 minutes. And so as part of that 15 minutes is standing up there and explaining why Atlanta, but as many as you know, a lot of that pre-work has already been done. You're working the phone, you're talking to people, you're selling them every time you're on a conference call, you're trying to put your benefits out there, why do you have to? So it's a constant sell, but then you get that 15 minutes where the owners are down in Florida and they're gonna make the decision. And so this video was the video that was put together that was part of the 15-minute. I think it's going to touch on a few things, but I think it kind of brings together a lot of the things that I discussed today. So let's see if I can make this happen.
Atlanta, the capital of the South. The birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, the home of countless sports championship events over the years. Touchdown! From the World Series to college football and basketball to the Olympics. 20 years ago, we brought the Centennial Olympic Games to Atlanta and helped our city evolve from a regional metropolis to an international destination. The Olympics helped Atlanta transform. I'm Andy Young, and I worked in the Civil Rights Movement, became ambassador to the United Nations, then came back to Atlanta to be its mayor. In all of these jobs, what we worked for was to give all American citizens the opportunity to reach their full potential, whether that be in a job or in life. Atlanta today is reaching that potential. It has transformed. Today we have the world's busiest airport, just 15 minutes from downtown. 80% of the U.S. population can get here within 2 hours on a direct flight. Atlanta is the #4 destination in the United States for tourists. 50 million visited here last year. Our population has grown from 1 million in the 1970s to almost 7 million today. And Atlanta has the third largest concentration of Fortune 500 companies and some of America's greatest brands. We are a booming, vital, diverse American city where the American dream is being realized each and every day. And sports has played a huge part in Atlanta's journey. Whether it was the Olympics 20 years ago, the devotion that we have for our college football teams, and of course the Falcons, a vital part of Atlanta since 1966. And now, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, being built downtown, where it will not only be the heart of Atlanta, but where it is helping to transform the neighborhood next door. This is the community where Martin Luther King Jr. lived and where the civil rights movement was nurtured. But it's an area that had been left behind. Today, the construction of the stadium has brought jobs that are changing lives. Streets are safer, schools are getting better, and decay is being swept away. And Atlanta itself has transformed dramatically since the last time the Super Bowl came to town. It is quickly becoming one of the most connected and walkable cities in the country. There are rapid transit stops on either side of the new stadium. There's a new streetcar system. Right next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Phillips Arena, the Centennial Olympic Park, the World of Coke, the College Football Hall of Fame, the Aquarium, and the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And just a stone's throw from here is Midtown, a booming hub filled with high-tech pioneers and a restaurant and nightlife scene that is world-class. 10,000 hotel rooms within walking distance of the stadium, 85,000 more nearby. International conventions and sports events like the Final Four, the SEC Championship, and the 2018 College Football National Championship. Festivals, concerts, more are lining up, coming to the heart of Atlanta. Come and enjoy the transformation of this historic global metropolis. And bring the Super Bowl back to Atlanta.
How we went about making the pitch and promoting a lot of the things that I talked about in the presentation being all put into a 6-minute video. I want to talk about maybe what we're doing going forward, and then I'm going to come back a little bit and talk about some of our venues and some of the things that have expanded beyond just the venues and how it's impacting us in different ways. But CrossFit Games. So I talked about, we're always talking about these big events. But when we sit down at the Sports Council and Dan starts to look at these, he's always researching because, remember, you have a schedule and you have these venues and you're trying to figure out how can you bring other people in here and how does it lead to more exposure for the city. And so this is an interesting one. So this, I believe, is the CrossFit Games in LA. When you take a look at the stadium, the number of people that have come to watch people work out and compete. And I mean, it's amazing. And you know, and it's one of the things is my experience of working in sports. We all have a sport that we're passionate about, but I'm always surprised when people could be and sometimes are dismissive of certain things because it's just not their interest. But once you get into them and understand them, there's always a core group of people. We talked about the lacrosse. We talked about the diving. I mean, these NCAA championships just aren't the Final Four. The NCAA hosts and manages 88 NCAA men's and women's championships every year. And they go from skiing championships to bowling to beach volleyball all the way up to the Final Four. And we're constantly going through that list looking for which ones and where do we have the venue to be able to recruit them. So I can tell you, we've got bids on the table for some of these, and we're looking to bring them in and win them. But this is one that we're looking at, the CrossFit Games. Look at the number of people. I'm amazed, right? Dan sat down, he was showing it. Even we're looking at the CrossFit games. I'm not sure I've ever heard of it. Well, let me tell you about it. And then we're doing this is another one. NCAA growing sport, averaging 4 to 5% growth a year over the last 10 years in Georgia. Could we go make a play and have the wrestling move out of the Midwest and out of the Northeast and start to bring it down to Atlanta, where we're seeing growth and interest in the sport? So this is a proposal that's on the table right now with the NCAA. But this is a shot of I believe it's the Lincoln Center, Philadelphia. Was this Madison Square Garden? And so when it starts off, you can see the number of 8 different. Look at the number of people. So this is earlier in the competition, and then eventually you end up with one mat center stage with the championship. But again, these people travel. These are their kids. They're passionate about the sport. It's amazing. There's actually connectivity in the community with some ex-Olympic wrestlers and college wrestlers that live in Atlanta, and how they support this bid and this process, and how we call on them for some support. But at the end of the day, an opportunity to bring a bunch of people that have never been to Atlanta to experience what Atlanta has to offer, and hopefully impact them in decisions as future opportunities to come to Atlanta and work and live here. The other one is the one no one says no one ever wants to admit, WrestleMania. So this was amazing because we won, it was 27, WrestleMania 27. There was 72,000 people at the Georgia Dome, sold out. There were over 2 million plus viewers on pay-per-view, and the tax benefit from that was tracked at about $8 million. So it's amazing what this sport, but I think this kind of says it all. So Georgia Dome, sold out, WrestleMania 27, taking a look at, can we bring another WrestleMania here for the impact of it? But I was amazed when I went down there to look at the passion and to sit in there, and I had a moment where I had no idea. I just had no idea it was this big. But it was an amazing event, and people love the event, and they spend money, and they come to Atlanta, and more opportunity. By the way, it was 29 countries. 29. So ticket buyers from 29 countries came in for this. Another comment, too, if I come back to, I didn't spend time, was that the estimated economic impact on the Super Bowl coming to Atlanta is about $400 million. And was given another statistic that we were looking at for San Francisco. And as San Francisco estimates 250,000 people came to the city of San Francisco without a ticket. Now, we don't know how many of them actually bought a ticket when they got there, but still, in itself, 250,000 people wanted to be in San Francisco and be around the Super Bowl and experience. So it's just not the ticket holders. There's these free concerts that we've seen in Centennial Park. There's the Fan Fest. It's all these different things we wrap around it that create an opportunity for everyone in Atlanta to enjoy some part of it if you can't afford or can't have the opportunity to attend a game. This one I'm really excited about, and it's the Army-Navy game. So we have a great legacy in the Metro Atlanta of veterans. We have Fort Benning down the road, and this is up in Philadelphia with the Army-Navy game. And I think this would be great to be able to move it out of the Philadelphia, bring it down to Atlanta. And I don't know if you were going there, but yesterday Georgia State gave us the update on their stadium, and I think Dan leaned over to me and said, when will it be ready? And I think he was thinking this might be the good venue to be able to host an Army-Navy game, and we ought to take a look at it. But I think this would be phenomenal for us to be able to get on the agenda and be a regular participant in this, and still expand what we do here in Atlanta and keep looking for other opportunities. And then I want to come back to this. This is a game changer. You saw a little bit about what this stadium's going to do, a little bit about the thought that went into it, how it's going to impact it. But this beyond the stadium, when I was talking with the Falcons early on in this process, and of course they were incredibly excited at the opportunity to be able to go pursue a new stadium, and they were working through that processes. But the amount of time and effort that went into it, and I would imagine that anybody's building a stadium says we do that. But what they did is they went and looked at the best, and then they came back. And one of them was in Dallas, went back, came back, and then they said, okay, these are the premier. What could we do better? What could we do unique? What could we make it better than Atlanta? And it was things like, I think some of this has already been kind of discussed in the press, but creating parking areas that are going to be all grass. And this is the small way of, they say they want to create a tailgate environment. So when you park, it won't be on a concrete. They want it to be all grass so people feel like they're pulling in and they have the opportunity to tailgate. They went and talked to some of the other premier. They made some visits out down the road to Augusta about concessions. And understanding that one of the biggest criticisms of any sports franchise is the price of the concessions. And they came back, and I think this was talked about for a while, but it was, I guess, recently announced for the last few months. And they wanted to make it economical. And what was the margin? And can you come in and buy a bottle of water for a couple of bucks, not $6? Can you get your soda and have it unlimited refill so that the family could have different options and it's not about paying for a $10 hot dog or an $8 hot dog? Those are the kind of things they looked at. They're looking at technology. Of course, the aesthetics, the design, the way it opens up, all the big stuff, but there was a lot of little things that are going into this that they looked at. And I'll say another thing that perhaps maybe if you follow it, but when we sat down early on, there was this initial conversation about the soccer team. And they admitted, they said, we think this is really going to be big, maybe more so than people recognize. And so this stadium holds about 70,000. And they're going to have the Atlanta United. We were awarded, or Arthur was awarded the city of Atlanta, the soccer team. And they'll set the pitch up. And when they set the pitch up, I'll give you context, it'll hold 30,000. So they'll shrink it down a little bit, they'll extend the stands, and then you'll be real close. And so they've designed this to support the soccer team. But I think what's interesting about Atlanta and the sport of soccer is that 30,000 is what they're planning to host. They've not done a whole lot of advertising beyond the media and the PR, if you've looked at it. They've sold 26,000 deposits for season tickets on a seating capacity of 30,000. So 26,000 people have put deposits down for the right for seasons tickets. The next closest was the Seattle Sounders, which when they did their program a couple of years ago and opened up, they pre-sold 15,000. So I think it's amazing that this team hasn't even played a game, and you have 26,000 people that have put a deposit down and said, I want season tickets. So I think that's another opportunity. The other thing, and again, I'm looking at the clock, so help me out here, guys, because I can keep going and going, and I don't know. But we got an update on the Hawks, and this is where I talk about great ownerships of our teams. So not only do you have the revitalization and renovation of the arena, Phillips Arena, but there are a couple of other things that are going to help us down the line. In Brookhaven, they're putting the practice facility. And that practice facility is going to be a combination between sports medicine and the general public with Emory. It's the Emory practice facility with the Hawks. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have the athletes practicing, training, doing their therapy, and having anything that they need to be done there, along with the public open to if you have a bad knee and you're heading in there. And they're bringing in world class. And I mean, they talked about it, and I don't know enough about the company, but they refer to them as peak. And I think the comment was made that this company or healthcare management group for sports figures is one of the premier. And they're going to be in Brookhaven, and they're going to be part of this facility. So this is another way that the community wins from this, but also gives us another facility and creates this unique opportunity where athletes may want to come, and I believe that athletes will want to play for the Hawks because of this facility. And then the other thing that was announced is we now have the Hawks their own development team. So what the NBA is starting to say is that teams should have their own development team. So it was announced last week that Atlanta is going to get a development basketball team. It'll be based in South Atlanta. They're projecting they'll need a 3,500 space type of arena to support the development team. And so the first thought is, when that goes up, there's an opportunity for a 3,500 seat capacity to look at some other events that perhaps maybe the NCAA would fill perfectly, where the Dome or Phillips is too big to support. So always looking at those type of things and all the different opportunities that we have to attract different size events. So they don't all have to be big, but they can be small. And so I think that's it. I hope I've left you with some insight as to what's going on, how it all comes together. Again, in my career, I often find that even the projects I work on, people know pieces of it, but sometimes when you bring the collective view of it together and put it in front of people, it's impactful, and then we understand how do we have to move forward. So hopefully today I talked a lot about the properties, the extended metro market, what this city has to offer, and how well the Sports Council under Dan's leadership pulls this together with his small team, pulling on people. And really, to be honest, we've been nationally recognized as a sports council. I promise you, people are trying to emulate. They want to know what we're doing down here. And what really makes it work is not the fact that you have a great city, great people, great volunteers, but a willingness to step up and make this happen. There's never any collective issues. Everybody's like, how do you need me? How do we get involved? What can we do to make this happen? And I think we're given a great reputation. And we're looking. Dan was chirping yesterday. We were talking. He's already looking at beyond 19, beyond 20. You saw some of these 21, 22. How do we keep the funnel full of these events coming in? And of course, you got to execute on the ones that do come. So with that,
we have time for questions. There's a microphone in the back if you'll wait. We are taking this, and so wait till the microphone to ask your question. Just raise your hand.
Ron, Charlotte in North Carolina has their famous bathroom bill, and people are pulling out. Have we benefited from their demise?
not so let me say, not immediately, but I can tell you, and I'll look to Dan, is after some of that fell out, Dan was immediately on the phone saying, is there some opportunities for us here? And what really came out of those initial discussions is the immediacy of what some of the needs were. And the challenge, as I said before, was were venues available? And quite frankly, we looked at some of them, but there's already some concerts because they have minimum requirements for some of these bigger events. So I would say we didn't see the immediate because of logistics of actually pulling the events off and availability, but we hope in the long term that'll give us another look at some of these other things that we wanted to, and perhaps maybe we have a better position on some of that. So.
Good morning, Ron. How does transportation, the availability of transportation affect what you guys do, and what are some of the things that you guys are working on with the local governments around transportation?
Well, I think it's a lot around, as much as sometimes there's criticism in big cities on all transportation, the uniqueness of the city being tight. But we do have experience with the bus lines. We do have a MARTA system that facilitates. We do have transportation companies that are private that we can bring in to augment. I mean, the streetcar, and oftentimes you'll hear criticisms, but from where I sit, these are all little things that help to improve it. Of course, the recent vote on T-Spot, I think these things are all continued investment. The airport, 10-year investment in improving that. So I think that I've lived in a lot of different cities over my career as I moved around, and transportation is always a discussion. So I don't think that's unique to Atlanta. I think it can be a challenge, but I don't think it's unique. And I think there's a willingness for people to talk about how do we deal with those. And I would say that all of those are answers for us, but we make them happen. We have an experience about how to use all those different assets and address the issues of congestion and getting people in and out of the city for these large events. But it'll continue to be, and I think I'm very encouraged that while these things take time, they're going to happen and they will make it better. One thing that I want to touch on too, I forgot this, because I read the AGC sports section, and there was it Friday, Thursday, it was Tuesday section, and they did an interview with the Hawks, and they talked to the principal owner, Tony Ressler, who's with the Aquarius Group, the venture capital group that has the primary ownership, and they asked Tony about his plans. And while he didn't go into specifics, what he talked about is transforming downtown Atlanta to an entertainment where it goes all the time. So you're going to see, and I've heard on other reports, people will refer to it if you've ever been out to LA Live. Now, I don't know, I think discussions are taking place, and Tony's acknowledged his desire to create more downtown. We'll have to see how that plays out. But watch the landscape of downtown Atlanta continue to change, not just with what's going on, but discussions that are taking place about future opportunity. So it's going to, for those that have been here, just watch the next 5-10 years. It's going to be amazing.
With the, I'm curious about, for one, do you guys also support utilizing the Atlanta Braves Stadium? And also I'm curious with, in this case, the Braves moving out of the core of the city, how that may have changed things for you, in terms of like the hotel space or how you can attract events to the Braves Stadium.
Well, I don't know that it's changed anything other than perhaps there is this discussion whether it's downtown or is it's out in Cobb County there. I think that, I don't want to speak for the Braves, but I would think that with the new stadium going online and spending time with them, and I've spent a lot of time talking about Mercedes-Benz and the thought that went into that, they would sit here and I could tell you just as proud of all the thought that's going into the Battery and the fan experience. And I would think that they want to attract an MLB All-Star game to that park very soon after they move in. But more importantly, they want to get a championship and winning team on the field. So I think it's, again, when I mentioned Dan came aboard, we didn't want to restrict it because we think these other venues still create experiences that impact the opportunity to continue to track the big ones downtown, but using Kennesaw State, using the Aquatic Center, looking at these other venues that don't have to be 70,000 capacity. You just can't bring a diving championship in, not that you could, but with the Aquatic Center, or put it in a 50,000 seat arena. It just, people wouldn't want to see it. The experience wouldn't be good.
Just prior to the Rio Olympics, there was a lot of talk about how unprofitable they might be for Brazil. Are there any of these events that you look at? Do you run profitability on them? Are there any that you say it's not worth doing? Any kind of financial analysis that goes along?
I think, and Dan probably could shed a little light, but the economists with the Chamber of Commerce are always looking at the financial benefit going in. Dan, I'm not familiar, do we actually do post, but I think that given is all that analysis is done up front, even with the Super Bowl, and some of the projections are always done up front to help pitch and sell it. I've had some experience with Olympics. They can be a challenge, the commitment with the venues, and whether those things have residual value beyond that, and what's left behind and how it's used. So I think those larger events like the Olympics, where you create a whole, I don't know, city has to be built. And if you don't have a good plan on how that stuff's going to be used, there's stories of cities that are still struggling with venues that are sitting in decay. But I'm not aware, maybe Dan, on your side you do the post analysis, but we do all that analysis going in with the economists from the Chamber of Commerce to look at that stuff, because people want to know, especially if it's private sector and public sector money. There's going to be a discussion about what are the benefits here. So.
And hey, Ron, another question right here. I guess I know we touched on a lot of the kind of positives and some of the successes here in Atlanta. I know one, being a little bit newer to the area, I'm not as familiar with the Atlanta Thrashers and our Triad hockey here. Was curious just to hear if from your seat or from other seats, if you've heard like, I guess what we've learned from that situation and maybe that we've changed going forward. If you could touch on why hockey didn't work out here.
Oh, maybe on a personal level we can talk about that. I have some opinions on it, but I think it's unfortunate. And I come from so my bias, I'm a huge hockey fan. Grew up in Detroit. My son played a lot of travel hockey. Lived here in Atlanta. It's amazing, the hockey community. So this is one of those things where people go, ice hockey. There are some amazing ex-athletes that live here in Atlanta that were great hockey players that some of you may or may not know of. So there's this little community. So I have a whole opinion on that, but I'm sorry to see that we don't have a team, and I really wish we did as a personal level, as a fan of the game. So it's unfortunate. And then, you kind of look at it and say 2 teams have moved. Will we ever get a third chance? I hope so, but maybe not. Maybe a World Cup, right? You can add another person to the staff. We'll go for a World Cup. Yeah, there you go. That's big.
I've got a quick question.
Yes.
Is the Super Bowl host committee formed out of your team at the Atlanta Sports Council, or is that in place yet for the host committee?
So typically, just at a high level, how this happens is the Sports Council and Dan's team will put this together and make the bid and proposal connected to the teams and the properties and the business community. Then what happens is you have to establish a legal entity. So then there's a legal entity that's put together, and there's usually a governing board that may involve some leadership from the properties, and then there are some team members. Some of these people are on the Sports Council, some of them are not. They could be consultants, they could be people that have worked in the industry before. And then again, we just saw some of this for the championship game. Dan reviewed it yesterday. Dan strategically, and it's amazing what these 4 people do. I can't stress enough, and Dan's going to give me a hard time after, but he then takes his team members and they become part of the legal entity to execute them. And the strategy behind that is, again, that continuity. It's not Dan and team pitching and working, or the property owners, and then we're gone. It's, hey, now you're working with people that were in the meeting, that were on the conference call. So that tasks the team. They're looking at what they have to do future, but they're also on sub-legal entity committees to support these big events. So yes, there are team members put together with a governing board.
First of all, thank you for what you and Dan do. It's a wonderful asset our city has. all of us are very proud that this is kind of the center of college football. And I was aware of some of the things that you brought up. I was not aware of the Army-Navy opportunity.
He's researching, yeah.
So,
You're researching?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I'm guessing not many people here have been to an Army-Navy game. It is the most unique experience in college football I've ever seen, and it would be a truly feather in our cap if we could get an Army-Navy game. It's a very special opportunity, and
Yeah.
all right, get to work.
Yeah. But again, the challenge is staging. The challenge is getting people to come out of certain areas that they're comfortable with, and hopefully maybe not this time, but eventually. And persistent, very persistent in trying to fill that out. And I agree with you. So, and by the way, that list is a short list. I mean, if you sit and go with Dan will list off 15, 20 others. I mean, his concern is not going after them and putting the proposals. It's how do I stage them in what years and what venues will be available so that we can make sure we can deliver, because we want to deliver on them, right?
Hey, Ron. So this question is for you and Dan regarding there is a lot of talk to make Atlanta as one of the first cyber cities in the country. I mean, are you guys seeing the synergies with your operations, and how are you influencing that?
I don't know, from an economic, my extent would say just because of the industry, the large med tech, fintech, Georgia Tech, and being able to create that environment and build off of it with all the technology that's putting in. Look at, I sat with somebody in a conversation with Georgia Tech talking about how do we retain more of the talent and the burgeoning entrepreneurial opportunities that exist around technology so that we don't lose some of the people that might perhaps be heading to Silicon Valley. I think if we can continue to see the infrastructure being built around some of that stuff, the technology that we want to put in place, and the people that are staying here to create this because it's such a great place to live, that we are certainly going to be on the cutting edge. And I think we've been acknowledged for some of the efforts that have been done on the infrastructure. Not I think, I know we have. So I'm not sure that gets right to your question, but I think those are things that are hard to see when you see the one-off stories, but when you take a step back and look at the collective things that are being done, it's really amazing what the city's still going through and continues to go through, at least in the next 10, 15 years, and I don't see it stopping. In fact, we might have, back to the transportation, we might be a victim of our success if we don't get the transportation, right? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for coming. This is sort of a follow-up to that question. I'm just curious if you guys have done any research into bringing some of the more esports type of events to Atlanta, things like League of Legends, which, there's big events in Los Angeles, and I think there have been some in New York, but just curious if you guys have explored anything like that, or more like the drone racing and things. I know that there have been some of those type of events held at the Georgia Dome already, but they were closed to the public. I was just curious if you guys have looked into doing more of those sorts of things.
Dan, I know we've discussed, but I don't know how hard, if any, we've pursued. So I know we've had discussions about always looking at where future opportunity is for the market, right, and the opportunity we have.
So, hello everyone. First, you can see why we're so successful as an organization is because of the passion that Ron brings. Really, really do compliment and appreciate what his leadership has brought as chairman of our board. Who asked my son asks me that twice a week, by the way. So I just want you to know, it's Battlefield and NHL 17. He wants to have leagues of that. Turner Broadcasting System here in Atlanta has an equity stake, I believe, in that industry, and they televise gaming championships and tournaments, I believe, every Friday night on TBS. So while we have not had any official discussions with them, we certainly would be willing to pursue that, because that is a viable category, if you will. As you say, that there's a ton of money being spent within that segment. Our role would be more in the line if there's an organized bid process by the entity that owns e-gaming, if there is one, like an NFL of e-gaming, if they were to then distribute a bid process to communities to say, if you want this, go get it, here's the process. That's where we come in to manage that process. Until that point, we might not jump right in until that. So hopefully that answers it.
Thank you. You good? Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.
Thank you, Ron. As our habit is to award a nice red and black sculpture for you to commemorate today's event. Thank you for all the work that you're doing for the city of Atlanta and Metro, and as fans we all benefit, but also as part of the business community. We really appreciate all of your efforts as Dan as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me out.